Have you ever believed that a small act of kindness, just a warm glance, a gentle voice, or a quiet cup of milk, could change someone's entire world? If so, you're in the right place, where the quietest moments tell the loudest stories. Before we begin, take a second to like this video and subscribe to our channel, because the world needs more reminders that compassion still exists, and that it's often found in the most unexpected places. Today's story doesn't begin with fame or fortune. It begins with a waitress. A quiet girl in a frayed jacket, and a plate of warm eggs served before the sun is fully up. But where it ends, that you'll never see coming. Let's begin. Haley Brooks tied her apron with a kind of rhythm that comes only from years of early mornings and muscle memory. At 28, she was entering her fourth year working the morning shift at Maple and Pine Diner, a cozy roadside stop nestled in a quiet Midwest town where the fog still hugged the pavement at sunrise. She arrived each day before the sky had fully turned blue, often beating the cook through the door. While others still clung to their pillows, Haley was already checking the syrup dispensers, wiping down the red leather booths, and folding napkins with neat corners. The diner itself wasn't much to look at, just a squat brick building with chipped green trim and a flickering neon sign that buzzed faintly at night. But inside, it had the kind of warmth money couldn't buy. Locals called it Maple, as if it were a friend, and in a way it was. Haley knew this better than anyone. She knew which booth creaked when you leaned back too far, which window caught the best light for early coffee sippers, and which burner on the kitchen stove always needed a little extra jiggle. More importantly, she knew her customers. Not in the polite, "how's your day?" kind of way, but in the black coffee, no sugar, and your wife's still recovering from knee surgery, right? kind of way. She knew that Mr. Green, the retired postman, liked his toast extra dark and always arrived at 6:03 a.m. sharp. That Miss Alberta, a former kindergarten teacher, needed gentle reminders to take her heart pills, always tucked in the front pocket of her cardigan. And that Tommy, a fourth grader who walked to school alone most days, had a sweet tooth for cinnamon rolls and an unfortunate tendency to miss the bus whenever it rained. Haley remembered birthdays without needing to look at a calendar. She kept spare umbrellas under the counter. And whenever she heard that someone had lost a pet or gotten bad news from the doctor, a warm slice of pie on the house seemed to find its way to their table. People often asked her how she stayed so cheerful. The truth was, she didn't always. Rent was tight, her car had more rust than paint, and her manager, Carl, treated the staff like they were all just barely replaceable. But Haley didn't do the job for Carl. She did it for the people, ordinary folks with ordinary struggles, trying to hold their lives together one pancake breakfast at a time. There was something sacred about those early hours. Before the rush, before the noise. Just the hiss of the coffee machine, the sizzle of bacon, and the quiet nods between early risers who didn't need words to feel seen. Haley thrived in that space. Not because it paid well, it didn't. Not because it was glamorous, it certainly wasn't. But because it mattered. It mattered when a lonely widow came in just to hear her name spoken out loud. It mattered when a tired father got 5 minutes of peace with a cup of coffee and a newspaper. It mattered when Tommy laughed with his mouth full of frosting. Haley wasn't trying to change the world. She just wanted to make one corner of it a little softer. She never bragged, never posted pictures of herself handing out to-go meals or refilling someone's coffee 3 times without charging. She just did it. Quietly. Consistently. The same way she had shown up for work every morning without fail, rain, snow, or sinus infection. Carl, her manager, didn't share her sentimentality. He ran the place like a stopwatch and cared more about napkin counts than customer birthdays. But Haley had learned to tune him out. She wasn't there for him. The regulars noticed. They noticed when she refilled their mugs before they had to ask. When she brought extra napkins for Mr. Green's arthritis. When she tucked a note into Tommy's backpack on the day of his spelling bee. And though she would never admit it, Haley had dreams. Quiet ones. The kind that lived in the back of her mind when she scrubbed down counters or rolled silverware into cloth wraps. She dreamed of a place of her own one day, a cafe that played soft music in the mornings and never turned away a hungry kid just because they couldn't pay. But for now, this was her place. Maple and Pine. A little diner in a quiet town, and a waitress who believed that kindness didn't need a spotlight to be real. It started on a Monday. Haley was wiping down the counter near the register when the bell above the door gave a soft jingle, 7 a.m. on the dot. She glanced up, expecting to see Mr. Green or maybe a construction crew filing in early. But instead, a small figure slipped through the door, moving so quietly she might have missed her entirely if she hadn't been looking. The girl couldn't have been more than 9 years old. Pale, thin, and bundled in a navy blue knit jacket that had clearly seen better winters. The cuffs were frayed, one sleeve longer than the other, and the zipper had been replaced with mismatched buttons. Her backpack was too large for her frame, hanging off her shoulders like an anchor, and she clutched it against her chest as though it held everything she owned. Without a word or a glance around, she moved toward the back corner booth, the one farthest from the windows, half shielded by a potted plant and an old jukebox that hadn't worked since 2011. She slid in and sat low, her small frame barely rising above the tabletop. Eyes down. Shoulders hunched. Silent. Haley waited a moment, then grabbed a menu and walked over, her steps soft and slow. When she reached the booth, the girl didn't look up. Just stared at her own hands, fingers wrapped tightly around the backpack straps. "Good morning, sweetheart," Haley said gently. "Would you like something to eat?" The girl said nothing at first. Then, barely above a whisper, came the reply, "Eggs and toast, please." The voice was so soft, Haley had to lean in to catch it. She smiled and nodded. "Coming right up." When it came time to pay, the girl opened her backpack, pulled out a handful of coins and crumpled dollar bills, and laid them carefully on the table. Haley counted quickly with her eyes. It wasn't enough. Not quite. She hesitated for just a moment before slipping the change off the table and into her apron pocket. "Looks like we're running a breakfast special today," she said with a wink, her voice low enough that no one else could hear. "Student discount." The girl's cheeks flushed a faint pink, but she said nothing. Just nodded once and looked down again. Haley brought over the eggs and toast a few minutes later, along with a glass of warm milk she hadn't charged for. "Growing bones need calcium," she said as she set it down. The girl didn't smile. Didn't even look up. But she ate every bite, slowly, methodically, chewing with quiet focus. She kept one hand on the strap of her backpack the entire time, as if afraid it might disappear if she let go. And then she left. No goodbyes, no thank you. Just gathered her things, zipped the coat to her chin, and disappeared out the door as silently as she'd entered. The next morning, she came again. Same time. Same booth. Same order. Same worn-out backpack hugged to her chest. And once again, the coins came up short. And once again, Haley covered the rest without a word. For the rest of the week, the pattern held. The girl never spoke beyond her soft-spoken order. She never made eye contact, never touched the jukebox beside her, never responded when customers passed nearby. But she always came at the same time. Sat in the same place. Ate the same thing. And Haley, without question, served her. Quietly. Carefully. Sometimes she added a banana on the side. Sometimes a tiny sugar cookie slipped onto the edge of the plate. The girl never acknowledged the extras, but she never left a crumb behind. Haley started looking for her before the door even opened each morning. Something about the girl's presence, as hushed as it was, tugged at her. There was no school logo on the jacket, no phone number on the backpack, no name. Just a quiet child in the same tattered coat, paying for most of her meal with a kind of precision that only came from counting change in private. Haley never asked where she came from, or why she came alone. The girl never offered. But the air around her was heavy in a way Haley couldn't shake. A sadness not spoken, only carried. Like the jacket itself had soaked it in. By the end of the second week, The girl in the navy coat had become a quiet constant at Maple and Pine. She came in like clockwork, 7 a.m. sharp, never late, never early. She never brought anyone with her. Never asked for more. Never smiled. And Haley never failed to greet her with the same gentle warmth, the same soft-spoken care, and always, with a little help on the bill. But not everyone found the routine heartwarming. It was a Thursday when Carl, the diner's manager, finally noticed. Haley had just set down a plate of eggs and toast with a warm glass of milk when she turned and nearly bumped into him. Carl stood by the counter, arms crossed, eyes locked on the girl's booth with a sour expression spreading across his face. "What's this?" he asked flatly, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the morning hum of conversation. Haley straightened. "Just breakfast. For the same little girl who's been coming in every morning." "She pay for it?" Haley hesitated. "Most of it." Carl's eyes narrowed. "Most isn't all. Are you covering her tab again?" "She's a kid, Carl," Haley said carefully. "She's never with an adult, and she always tries. She's only ever short by a couple of bucks." Carl gave a bitter chuckle and shook his head. "This is a business, Haley. Not a shelter." "She doesn't eat if I don't help," Haley said quietly. Carl didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned and walked to the corkboard near the kitchen and pinned up a fresh white sign in bold red ink. "Notice to all staff. No unaccompanied minors are to be served unless accompanied by a guardian and able to pay in full. Unauthorized discounts will result in wage deductions and formal disciplinary action." Haley stared at it, her stomach knotting. The message wasn't just clear, it was personal. Everyone in the kitchen knew who it was meant for. She could feel the shift in the room, the glances from other servers, the way someone stifled a laugh as they passed behind her. By noon, the sign had already made its way into the staff group chat, complete with a snide caption, "Saint Haley, Defender of Lost Children." A string of laughing emojis followed. Haley saw the notification and turned her phone face down without replying. Later that afternoon, Carl called her into his office. The space was cramped and cluttered with paperwork, old invoices, and a dusty coffee maker no one used. Haley stood awkwardly as Carl reached into a drawer and pulled out a single piece of paper. "This is your written warning," he said, barely glancing up. "Next time you cover someone's bill without authorization, it's your paycheck." Haley stared at the form. Her name was already printed at the top. "She's a child," she said softly. "Alone. She looks over her shoulder every time the door opens. You really want me to turn her away?" Carl looked up then, finally meeting her eyes. His voice remained cold. "It's not your job to feed every stray that walks in. This is a diner, Haley. Not your personal charity. Sign it." Her hand hovered over the pen. She could explain how the girl counted out every penny, how her coat was too thin, how she never once asked for anything extra. She could describe how the child flinched when loud voices echoed, how she never made eye contact, how her silence said more than any words ever could. But she didn't. She just signed. "Don't make me regret keeping you on," Carl said as she turned to leave. "Plenty of people out there who'd kill for your shift." Haley walked out of the office feeling like her chest had been squeezed tight. She returned to wiping tables with mechanical movements, refilling ketchup bottles, answering coffee orders, and avoiding the curious eyes of her coworkers. That night, her apartment felt colder than usual. The flickering light in the hallway hadn't been fixed, and her heating unit groaned with the effort of warming the drafty space. Haley lay awake long after midnight, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the girl, the careful way she placed her money on the table, the way her shoulders hunched when people walked past, the way she always looked at the door like she was expecting someone who never arrived. Haley couldn't stop wondering, what would happen if she didn't come tomorrow? What if no one else noticed she was hungry? The next morning, Haley arrived at the diner even earlier than usual. She didn't bother checking the staff bulletin board, She didn't need another reminder of Carl's threat. Instead, she walked straight to the back, tied on her apron, and pulled out her own wallet. She used cash to pay for the same meal she always made at 7 a.m., eggs, toast, and a warm glass of milk. This time, she rang it up herself under staff meal, and slipped the receipt into her pocket. The transaction was off the books, detached from the diner's daily tallies. It wasn't about bending rules anymore. It was about staying under Carl's radar while doing what she knew was right. When the clock hit 7, Haley was already setting the plate on the far corner booth, her eyes drifting to the door. The bell chimed right on time. The girl in the navy blue coat stepped inside, the same as always, backpack tight to her chest, hair tied in a loose ponytail, boots scuffed from too many miles walked alone. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Haley greeted her with a soft good morning, and the girl gave the slightest of nods before sliding into the booth. Haley placed the plate gently on the table, the glass of milk beside it. "The usual," she said. "On the house today. Someone else already paid." It wasn't a lie. The girl stared at the food for a moment, then picked up her fork. As always, she ate slowly, silently, head low, one hand still gripping the strap of her backpack. Haley pretended to clean nearby tables, but kept an eye on her from the corner of her vision. There was something different in the air that morning, an almost imperceptible shift. The girl's shoulders were still tense, her movements still cautious, but there was a stillness to her that felt less like fear and more like thought. When she finished, she didn't rush to leave like usual. She sat a few extra seconds, staring down at the empty plate. Then, without looking up, she reached into the front pocket of her backpack and pulled out a small folded square of paper. She slid it under the empty glass of milk before slipping out of the booth and heading toward the door. She didn't look back. Haley waited until the girl had disappeared beyond the window before walking over to the booth. She picked up the milk glass and found the paper underneath, folded neatly, carefully. The creases were worn, like it had been opened and closed many times before. With gentle fingers, Haley unfolded it. Inside, in large, slightly shaky handwriting, were 7 words. "You're not scared of me. Thank you." And beneath that, smaller, almost as if added later, "Thank you for the warm milk." Haley felt her breath catch in her chest. She read the note again, then again. Her throat tightened. It was the first real communication the girl had offered in weeks, something more than a quiet order or a shy nod. It wasn't elaborate. It wasn't poetic. But it was honest. Raw. It said more than a speech ever could. Haley pressed the paper flat, then folded it again and slipped it into the pocket of her apron, right over her heart. It stayed there the rest of her shift, and she touched it more than once, just to remind herself it was real. That afternoon, as the sun began to slant through the diner's windows, casting golden rays over formica tables and half-empty coffee cups, Haley stood at the register and stared out at the street. The usual faces came and went, workers, retirees, sleepy students, but she kept thinking about that note. About how much effort it must have taken the girl to write it. About how it had probably sat in her bag for days, waiting for the right moment. About how she had left it not with fanfare or thanks, but with quiet dignity, an offering placed beneath a glass of milk. It wasn't just gratitude. It was trust. A kind of fragile, precious trust that didn't come easy. Especially not from a child who never smiled, never spoke, never asked for help. A child who had learned to make herself small, unnoticeable, invisible. But today, she had chosen to be seen. And that meant everything. The next morning, something felt off. Haley arrived at Maple and Pine even earlier than usual. She prepped the girls' usual meal, eggs, toast, and warm milk, and set it aside at the back counter. As the clock approached 7 a.m., she found herself glancing at the door more often than she cared to admit. But 7 o'clock came and went. By 7:10, her smile had faded. By 7:20, the eggs had gone cold. At 7:30, she reheated them just in case. By 7:45, She wrapped the toast in foil and put it under the heat lamp. But the girl never came. Haley tried to stay busy, refilling syrup bottles, topping off coffee mugs, wiping down already clean counters. But her eyes kept drifting to the corner booth, empty and untouched. Something wasn't right. The silence the girl usually carried with her now lingered in the air, but it felt heavier without her presence, like something had been taken away. At 8:15, the quiet hum of the diner was broken by the low growl of an engine outside. Heads turned as a sleek black SUV with tinted windows rolled up to the curb. The vehicle was out of place in the small-town setting, too polished, too deliberate. Before the bell above the door could chime, 4 men in dark suits stepped out of the SUV and entered the diner in a coordinated line. They didn't say a word. Their movements were crisp, professional, and entirely too quiet for the usual breakfast crowd. Every conversation in the diner died mid-sentence. Haley looked up from the register, a dish towel still in her hand, her heart beginning to race. The men scanned the room quickly, their eyes alert, expressions unreadable. Then one of them moved to the SUV's rear door and opened it. From the back seat, a tall man emerged. He wore a tailored gray suit that seemed too expensive for the town and too serious for breakfast. His hair was dark with a touch of gray at the temples, and his face carried a sharp, almost severe handsomeness, chiseled features, clean-shaven jaw, and piercing eyes that looked like they'd seen more than most. He stepped inside, and the diner held its breath. Even Carl, who had been barking orders in the kitchen, appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a towel, suddenly unsure of what to do with himself. The man walked with quiet authority, flanked by 2 of the bodyguards who stood just behind him like shadows. He didn't look around or glance at the menu board. He walked straight to the center of the diner and stopped. Then he spoke, calmly, clearly, but with weight. "I'm looking for the person," he said, "who's been helping my daughter." The words hit the room like a dropped glass. Haley froze. She knew before he said anything else. She knew by the way he held his posture, by the sharpness in his tone, by the sadness resting just beneath the control. The girl. The one in the navy coat. Carl stepped forward quickly, clearing his throat. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Maple and Pine. I'm the manager here. How can we?" The man cut him off with a single glance. "My daughter," he repeated. "She's 10 years old. Wears a navy knit jacket. Comes here alone. Every morning. At 7. Haley slowly set down the towel, her hands trembling. She stepped out from behind the counter. "That's me," she said, barely above a whisper. "I've been serving her." The man turned to her finally, and for the first time, something softened in his expression. The steel in his eyes gave way to something else, relief maybe. Or recognition. "She hasn't eaten outside the house since her mother died," he said, voice low. "Not once. She stopped speaking after the funeral. Stopped trusting. Nothing the therapists did helped." He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the same note Haley had received. The same one that now lived in the front pocket of her apron. "Yesterday," he continued, "she handed this to her tutor. She said it was from a waitress at the diner. She used words." "Words, miss?" "Brooks," Haley replied. "Haley Brooks." The man gave a small nod. "I had to find out who you were," he said. "I needed to know who made my daughter feel safe enough to speak again." The man stepped closer, holding Haley's gaze with surprising tenderness beneath his formal composure. He looked around the diner briefly, then motioned for his men to give them space. The bodyguards nodded and quietly spread out along the walls, their presence still commanding but no longer looming. "I'm Victor Whitmore," he said simply. Even Carl, standing off to the side, let out a quiet gasp. The name wasn't unfamiliar. Victor Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Technologies, a name that had graced the covers of Fortune, Wired, and Forbes. A man often photographed with global leaders, investors, or holding a microphone at charity galas. But he didn't look like a headline. He looked tired. Not physically, he was tall, straight-backed, and immaculately dressed, but there was a heaviness in his eyes that only grief could explain. "My daughter's name is Evelyn," he continued. "Evelyn Whitmore." Haley blinked. She hadn't known the girl's name. She hadn't wanted to ask, afraid of scaring her off. Victor's voice dropped slightly, quieter now, as if speaking aloud was an effort. "Evelyn stopped speaking 3 years ago. Right after the accident. A car crash. Her mother died instantly. Evelyn survived without a scratch, but, inside, something shut down. She was diagnosed with selective mutism. She spoke to me, barely. To her therapist, never. Tutors, teachers, specialists, no one got through." He looked down at the folded paper in his hand, the same note Haley had kept in her apron pocket, only now duplicated in Victor's hand, a copy Evelyn had made. Yesterday, she handed this to her learning specialist during a reading session. When asked about it, she said only 5 words: "The waitress is not afraid." Haley swallowed hard. Her eyes burned, but she said nothing. There was nothing to say. Victor's expression shifted, less business executive, more father. He unfolded the note slowly, smoothing the creases with his fingertips. "She's never said anything like that before," he said. "Not a word about anyone outside the house. And she's certainly never written a message to give away. Until now." He paused, letting the weight of it settle in the air. "I didn't come here to make a scene," he added. "And I didn't come here to demand answers." He looked straight at Haley again. "I came to thank you." Haley's voice cracked when she finally spoke. "I didn't do anything special." "You did," Victor said gently. "You treated her like she wasn't broken. You didn't stare, didn't hover, didn't try to fix her. You just saw her. And you were kind." He reached into his jacket once more and this time pulled out a business card, sleek, cream-colored, embossed in silver. "I understand this diner probably isn't the dream," he said. "And I imagine helping my daughter might have put your job at risk." Haley glanced toward Carl, who had retreated behind the coffee station, pretending not to listen. Victor extended the card. "This is my personal number," he said. "If you ever want to open a place of your own, a cafe, a bakery, a corner stand with the best toast in the state, I'll fund it. Completely. No strings. No contracts. Just kindness repaid." Haley stared at the card but didn't reach for it right away. Her hands were trembling again. "I don't understand," she whispered. Victor gave a small smile, the first she'd seen from him. It was thin and worn, but genuine. "I've spent my whole life trying to change the world with code and capital," he said. "But sometimes, what changes a life isn't a breakthrough or a nap. Sometimes, it's a warm plate of eggs. And a glass of milk. From someone who's not afraid." He held the card a little closer. "Please. Don't let this gesture go unanswered. Evelyn is starting to come back. You gave her that first step. Let me give you one too." Haley finally accepted the card, her fingers brushing his for the briefest moment. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than just an offer. It carried hope. She tucked it into her apron pocket, next to the note. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Around them, the diner slowly resumed its quiet hum, murmured conversations, forks clinking on plates, coffee dripping steadily behind the counter. But something had changed. Something important. And it had all started with a girl who didn't speak, and a waitress who listened anyway. Just as Haley tucked the business card into her apron, the bell above the diner's door jingled once more. Heads turned instinctively, but for Haley, it felt like the entire room had slowed. The early morning light streaming through the window glinted off the glass, casting a golden halo around the small figure who stepped inside. It was her. Evelyn. Same navy blue knit jacket, same oversized backpack hugged close to her chest. But this time, something was different. Her movements weren't hurried. Her posture wasn't curled inward. She wasn't just slipping in unnoticed. She was walking toward someone. Haley stood frozen by the counter as Evelyn's boots tapped softly across the tiled floor. The little girl stopped just a few feet away, looking up. And for the first time, she held Haley's gaze. Big, light gray eyes, once hidden behind fear and lowered lashes, now met hers without flinching. Haley's heart twisted, and she almost forgot how to breathe. Evelyn opened her mouth, her voice barely above a whisper but clear and certain. "Today, can I sit with you?" The words hung in the air like music. Every booth in the diner seemed to fall still. A spoon clinked to a stop in someone's coffee mug. Even the kitchen quieted. No one moved. No one spoke. The moment was too sacred to disturb. Haley felt a tear slide down her cheek. She didn't bother wiping it away. "Yes," she whispered back, her voice cracking. "Of course you can." She stepped out from behind the counter, walked to one of the side tables, and pulled out a chair, her hand trembling just slightly. Evelyn climbed up, setting her backpack on the seat beside her like it was an old friend who'd earned its place at the table. Haley sat across from her, folding her hands gently in front of her. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. It was whole. Evelyn looked down at the table for a moment, then slowly reached out and touched the salt shaker, spinning it lightly between her fingers. A small, fidgeting motion, but calm. In control. Then, as if the moment had called for it, Evelyn looked back up at Haley. And smiled. It wasn't wide. It didn't stretch from ear to ear. But it was there. Small. Shy. Fragile. But unmistakably real. Haley felt something break open inside her, like sunlight spilling into a room that had been locked for years. "Would you like the usual?" she asked, her voice soft. Evelyn nodded once. Haley stood and walked to the kitchen, blinking quickly to clear her eyes. The diner was still unusually quiet. A few customers whispered, watching with expressions of quiet wonder. Carl, from behind the register, said nothing. For once, even he seemed to understand the importance of staying silent. Haley brought the eggs, toast, and milk to the table, placing them gently in front of Evelyn. The girl picked up her fork with both hands and took a bite. Then another. She didn't rush. She didn't keep her eyes down. She simply ate. Haley didn't speak, didn't press. She just watched, smiled, and waited. Between bites, Evelyn glanced up and offered another tiny smile. Her hands had stopped shaking. Her shoulders were no longer hunched. And in that one shared breakfast, something unspoken passed between them. A promise. That no matter what happened next, this table, this corner of the world, would always be a safe place. 1 month later, the sign on the front door read, "E&H Corner Cafe, now open." It was painted in soft cream lettering on a slate blue wooden board, hanging beneath a small awning that fluttered gently in the breeze. The cafe sat just 6 blocks down from Maple and Pine, on a quieter street corner surrounded by elm trees and wide sidewalks. It had once been a hardware store, but the windows now gleamed with fresh glass and the scent of cinnamon and roasted coffee drifted out each morning before sunrise. The E stood for Evelyn. The H for Haley. Inside, the space felt nothing like a corporate venture. The floors were warm wood, the walls lined with shelves of donated books and handmade crafts from local artists. There were mismatched chairs and soft cushions, chalkboard menus updated daily in colorful handwriting, and a small plant sitting at each table, its pot labeled with a name: Hope, Grace, Patience. But the heart of the cafe was in the back left corner, a quiet nook with low tables and floor pillows, beneath a sign that read in simple block letters, "No child turned away. All students welcome." That part had been Haley's idea. And Victor hadn't hesitated. He'd offered full financial backing, from the lease to the renovations to the first 6 months of payroll. But he had kept his word. He never stepped in, never dictated a thing. "I'm not investing," he told her on opening day. "I'm just making space for someone who knows what kindness looks like." And Haley had filled that space. The cafe had a soft open, no press releases, no ribbon-cutting ceremony. Just a few flyers tacked up around town, a quiet post on the community Facebook page, and word of mouth that traveled faster than anyone expected. Within days, the regulars from Maple and Pine began drifting in, curious at first, then committed. The coffee was better, the scones homemade, the atmosphere gentler. Martin, the elderly line cook from the old diner, had joined Haley's team and brought his secret hash brown recipe with him. And every morning, without fail, Evelyn came. She wore a new coat now, deep forest green with buttons that matched, but still carried the same old backpack. Not because she needed it, but because it had been part of her journey. She arrived an hour before school, pulled on a small apron embroidered with her initials, and went to work without needing to be asked. She arranged napkins, wiped down the kids' corner, wrote the daily specials in her careful, slanted handwriting. Sometimes she helped behind the counter, measuring milk, learning to steam it to the perfect temperature. Haley taught her gently, never rushing, always praising small progress. At first, Evelyn didn't say much. But slowly, steadily, she started to. A whispered good morning to a customer. A soft giggle when someone knocked over a salt shaker. A whispered suggestion to add cinnamon to the banana muffins. Little by little, the girl who once sat in silence at a corner booth was becoming a part of something. She wasn't just being served anymore. She was serving too. And it mattered. Customers noticed. They noticed the quiet way Evelyn handed out cookies to kids who looked nervous. They noticed how she carefully placed forks and spoons side by side, how she watched Haley with admiration, and how she lit up, just slightly, when someone thanked her directly. She was blooming. Not loudly. Not all at once. But beautifully. Haley often caught Victor standing by the door before work, watching from a distance. He rarely came in during the morning rush, preferring to give Evelyn her own space, but he always left a generous tip and a folded note with kind words tucked inside. She kept them in a small box behind the counter. What Evelyn didn't know was that Haley had also kept every note the girl had ever written, even the crumpled one from that very first day, still folded in the exact same way, the ink slightly smudged but the words eternal. "You're not scared of me. Thank you." Now, every inch of E&H Corner Cafe reflected that same spirit. Not just kindness for the sake of kindness, but the kind that required courage. Quiet courage. And for every child who walked through the door with empty hands and tired eyes, there was always a seat. Always a warm drink. Always a gentle smile waiting. Because Haley remembered exactly what it felt like to be the only one who noticed. And Evelyn remembered what it felt like to be noticed. It was a Tuesday morning when Haley found the small wrapped package on the counter. It was neatly tied with twine and placed beside the register. No card, no note, no instructions. Just a little bundle wrapped in brown craft paper, its edges carefully folded, its presence quiet and deliberate. She looked around the cafe. The morning rush had passed, and only a few regulars lingered over half-finished coffee and muffins. Evelyn was nowhere in sight, but Haley knew, deep in her chest, that the package was from her. She untied the twine slowly and peeled back the paper. Inside was a framed photograph. At first, it took her a moment to place the image. Then she saw it clearly. It was Evelyn, standing at the counter of E&H Corner Cafe, holding a plate with toast in one hand and a warm glass of milk in the other. Her jacket was zipped halfway, her hair pulled back, and her eyes looking straight into the camera. And there, nestled on her face, was a small but unmistakable smile. Beneath the photo, in Evelyn's now familiar handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for letting me be quiet, and still feel heard." Haley didn't realize she was crying until she felt the tears roll down her cheeks. She sat down at the nearest stool, the frame resting in her lap, her fingers tracing the glass. It wasn't just a gift. It was a full circle moment. A silent girl once invisible to the world, now offering a picture of herself not as she had been, but as she had become. Stronger. Braver. Present. Haley stood slowly and walked to the wall behind the counter, just to the right of the window where the morning sun always poured in. The spot was already glowing, kissed with gold light and warmth. It was the perfect place. With careful hands, she hung the photo. No plaque. No explanation. Just a picture, a handwritten sentence, and a story that didn't need to be told aloud to be understood. Customers noticed it almost immediately. Some paused to read the words, others just stared quietly. No one asked who the girl was, many already knew. And those who didn't could still feel the weight of what it meant. The photo became part of the cafe's soul. It wasn't flashy. It didn't match the decor. But it was honest. It reminded everyone who walked through the door that kindness didn't have to be loud, and that healing didn't always look like a miracle. Sometimes, it looked like a quiet child, a glass of milk, and someone who cared enough to listen without expecting anything in return. Evelyn never mentioned the gift. She simply resumed her usual routine, writing the chalkboard specials, helping restock napkins, humming softly to herself when she thought no one could hear. But every so often, Haley would catch her glancing at the photo. Just a quick flick of the eyes before going back to folding menus or tidying the sugar caddy. And every time she did, there was peace in her expression. As the weeks passed, life settled into a rhythm. The cafe grew busier, but never too busy. The no child turned away nook expanded to include bookshelves and crayons. Customers donated coats in the winter, shoes in the spring. Victor stopped by once a week, never empty-handed. The staff rotated, but the heart of the place never changed. And through it all, the photo remained on the wall, unmoving, unbothered by time. To most, it was just a sweet picture. To Haley, it was a promise kept. A reminder that even the smallest gestures, the quietest kindness, could echo for a lifetime. If you've ever believed that a warm glass of milk, a quiet smile, or a single glance of understanding could heal a heart that the world forgot, then this story was for you. We believe that real heroes don't always speak loudly. Sometimes, they serve breakfast at sunrise. Sometimes, they just listen. If this story touched you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Because somewhere out there, another quiet soul is waiting for someone to notice them. Leave a comment below and tell us, who saw you when you were invisible? And never forget, some people don't need attention. They just need to be heard.